But I see burnout as a gift. I see it as a gift because without this concept of burnout, we're not stimulated to do the things that we truly want for ourselves and actually pay attention to what we really want. I think that a lot of people who kind of coast along and don't really get burnt out, and then all of a sudden they come to a point where they're like, well, is this where we really want to go? Am I just running down life in this lane towards maybe the wrong direction? So I do think like elements of stress and burnout is actually necessary for us to re-question where we are and how do we want to proceed from here? And are we really going down the right track?
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. My guest today is an internist who is completely reimagining how we deliver primary medical care in the United States. His ideas are informed not only by his training in Western medicine, but also by his familiarity with Eastern traditions as well. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. Cheng Ruan. It is my absolute pleasure to be having a conversation today with Dr. Cheng Ruan out in the Houston, Texas area. Cheng, it's great to have you here, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Well, I'm just so honored to be interviewed by you, so thank you.
Well, you're very kind, and I just want to get right down to business.
Yeah.
There is so much about you, Cheng, that I find so fascinating. You are a relatively young person, and yet you are well on your way to, at least in my mind, upturning and reimagining the way primary care is practiced. And I think that's something that's way overdue. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But as always, I like to start at the beginnings. You had your beginnings in China. So tell us, how old were you when you came to this country and under what circumstances, if you will?
1990, I was 7 years old, which makes me 38 by my count.
Yeah.
Someone can fact check me. I think I'm 38.
And what particular part of China were you, the mainland or Taiwan? Or
I'm from the mainland in southeastern China.
I see.
And it's I actually was born in a large city, but transferred to a small village growing up. So things like electricity and running water were foreign to me.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was it that led to the immigration to the United States?
You know, my father, he's an MD PhD. He got his MD PhD in Japan. He was recruited by Baylor College of Medicine to develop something at that time was a secret. Now we know it as COX-2 inhibitors. And so that's sort of my father's claim to fame. Yes.
What a story.
Yes.
Well, that's a pretty good path to citizenship. And speaking of paths to citizenship, has your whole family been naturalized at this point?
Yeah. So I was naturalized at the age of 17.
Yeah.
And my parents at the same year. So we went through the whole green card thing and naturalized as citizens. So yeah, it's been a few years. Mm-hmm.
And so when you came to this country, were you fluent in English at that point or not?
Absolutely not. No. I was only fluent in two Chinese dialects, or technically three Chinese dialects, so Mandarin and then two of the lesser known ones. Yeah.
So you would have been at the age of about a second grader. How did that evolution into an English speaker come about? This fascinates me to death. It really does, because I unfortunately have only one language, and the fact that people can have multiple languages just destroys me. So let's hear the story.
Well, I think me, just like my sister, we're both very languagey people. We can mimic sounds. We're very musical. Yeah. So it only really took me about 3 months to lose my Chinese accent. And I think that was a pretty good gift. And then learning languages is sort of my forte. Same thing with my sister. We're both very similar. That's
pretty remarkable. And so do you have other languages other than Chinese and English?
So I do know a bit of French and Spanish. Just went through school, and Spanish because, well, it's sort of the environment that we live here in Houston, Texas. Yeah. And then, but in New York, where I trained for residency, picked up some Russian, picked up some Hebrew as well.
No kidding.
I was in Queens, so it was pretty fun. But
you do have a language gift.
I think I lost it. So, wow. But it's always fun to listen, and I tend to mimic noises and voices actually pretty well, and accents pretty well.
Absolutely fascinating. Incredible. So at the time that you arrived here as a 7-year-old, you're getting the language relatively easy, it sounds like. And did you just kind of fit in with the other second graders at that point, or what was the transition like for you?
No, I am a very tall person by Chinese people's standards. I'm 6'3" right now, but even when I was younger, I think I was the second tallest person in school, and it was really awkward for me being one of 4, Asian kids in schools. Mostly it's Hispanic population in that neighborhood. Yeah. And I think I probably picked up Spanish before I picked up English, just because I was in ESL, English as a second language classes, and learned a lot of Spanish through my friends over there. Yeah, and so, but it wasn't easy. I had a hard time assimilating because of cultural differences and because sort of the environment that I was in. But I think I turned out okay.
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say that. But back then, did you have moments of Mom, Dad, I want to go home?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. It was very scary, I think, because I think there, kind of grew up. I grew up in a not so wealthy neighborhood. Let's put it that way, and saw violence, saw a lot of crime, and was able to witness a lot of that, which I didn't really have in rural China. Yeah. But at the same time, develop resilience around that. And so in the Houston, Texas, we have recreational centers that's managed by the city of Houston. And Greg, who owned the recreational facility next to my house, which is also next to my school, really took me under his wings and introduced me to other cultures. And he was also a basketball coach. So I actually got obsessed about basketball in general. And that sort of, it helps because I was tall. So
what a stroke of luck that was. Yeah.
Yeah. And then by chance, we had a perfect attendance. We had a perfect attendance event, if you will, for all the students. And I got to meet Hakeem Olajuwon at that time.
Wow.
And and it was really changed my life, the way I kind of saw things. So
yeah, I bet it did. Mm-hmm. So at about what point did you begin thinking about a career in medicine? When you went to Texas A&M for undergraduate, was that the plan, or did it evolve?
Oh, that started in China. My grandfather's clinic basically is the first floor of our house, and we lived on the second floor. So I grew up with stethoscopes around my neck and running around naked, like my grandma used to tell me. Yeah. Oh, and my grandfather is very well known as bringing Western medicine to the East. And so, I wanted to do my due diligence and to bring like Eastern medicine to the West since I came to America. And it was,
even at that early age.
Yeah, I think I saw the respect that he had from the village members. They can't pay money. They'll bring chickens, and I love chickens, by the way. So I love it when they bring chickens. So I always had that bartering system. It was a very simplistic lifestyle. At the same time, it's very powerful to see how he actually changed people's lives, and it was great to see that.
I bet it was.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people in this country, as you know, have seen anything like that. Although
Right.
many of the people that trained me actually had lived in those days, and I think it does give you a different outlook on things. So you went
Yes.
to A&M with medical school in mind, but as I look over your CV, it looks like you really began to take on the role of an activist even in your youth at that point. I see that you
Yes.
established the, let's see, am I going to get this right? Institute for Development and Education of Asian American Leaders.
Yes. Yes. So that's one of my
Was that
pride and joys.
totally your idea, or
Um,
somebody else
it,
put it in your head? What?
that's a good question. I don't know who started the process, me or my friend Arnold, but we both wanted to have some sort of leadership opportunities for Asian Americans, and not necessarily because it's Asian Americans, but because at that time in 2001 at Texas A&M, the diversity in that school wasn't that great. It's not like it is right now. And it was the most conservative school in the nation, and it was predominantly a Caucasian population.
Sure.
And so, I was always colorblind in terms of races and ethnicities and stuff like that. But I adhere to the fact that there's a lot of stereotypical things that Asian Americans were actually known for. And I wanted to kind of get away from it because I think a lot of my friends just kind of had the idea that, hey, with Asian Americans, we're relatively timid and kind of adhere to the rules. And then here I am. I'm very loud, and I could be obnoxious at times, but I'm very passionate about everything I want to get into. So I wanted a platform for people to have a voice. So at that time, had I known that podcasting existed at that time, I would have done it. But at that time, it was for like in-person groups and discussing different issues. And honestly, it didn't matter what the issue was, as long as there's a voice for it. I was really wanting to put that out there. So we got together with graduate department of medical services at Texas A&M and conducted this thing as part of at that time it was called Vision 2020. So by 2020, Texas A&M wanted to have a much larger diversity of minority groups, which they hit that and way more back last year in 2020. But that program still exists, which is I'm really proud about that. Mm-hmm.
I bet you are. Were there others that were a part of that group who went on to have the kind of visibility that you do in their own areas of expertise?
Oh my gosh, yeah, a lot. So,
I had a feeling there would be.
Yeah, so we have people in the entertainment industry, movie and film industry. We have a really famous illustrator that went on to Pixar to be one of the lead people there. Wow. We had someone else start a nonprofit organization in Malaysia doing really big things. So I'm really proud of all the people that kind of went through that. And I still remember them and me as young people just talking about the possibilities of the world at that time and not realizing the potential that we potentially have.
That's really exciting. Good for you. So let's talk about medical school. I'm guessing you were a pretty good student.
Oh, no, it's terrible.
No kidding. You were so busy out organizing and saving the world that you couldn't keep your grades up. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think no, that's not it at all. In college, I really kind of rebelled against myself. I think that I had some understanding of what college really is, and then I just thought it was not the best use of my time to take these courses. Yet I knew I need to get through it. So I didn't really have a lot of passion for most of the courses I was taking. But then when medical school hit, it was the opposite. I was like a straight A person. I loved every second of medical school, even the annoying parts, even the tests. And so medical school, my grades were actually really, really good.
And you actually you elected to do that at one of the so-called offshore medical schools.
Yeah,
yours on the island of the city of Dominica in Barbados.
It was the country of Dominica. Yeah. So Ross University.
The other way around. Yeah.
Yeah. The Ross University at that time was in Dominica. Now it's in a different island. And that was one of the best experiences of my life in that first year of medical school because I got to go back to isolation a bit. I got to be in a place where you're on an island by yourself and you got to reinvent what you really wanted to do. And I started really focusing on the things that I wanted to do. I became a teaching assistant in my second semester for anatomy, and the teaching aspect of it really made me understand that, I was really wanting to be a teacher, and that's the projection I had for my MD, what we wanted to do.
Yeah, it sounds like that's kind of where your trajectory actually had its beginning.
Yes. I think that was the biggest instigator, and I had such a great time on the island. And we only spent the first year on the island. The rest is in the U.S. So, and then did some rotations in Miami, and spent most of my time in New York, actually. And then I got exposed to other different cultures and other people that were in similar situations as I was when I was younger, and really made me respect cultures in general, and have an understanding that, yes, we're all unique, but at the same time, the similar motivation drives us, and the same engine could really be taught for success.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. So, internal medicine residency at New York Hospital, part of Cornell Medical College, and you had picked internal medicine because of what?
Like I think I said before that I wanted to really integrate like Eastern and Western medicine, and internal medicine is a really nice start for that. And then, I was one of those med students that was kind of interested in everything. I really enjoyed every rotation that I went through, except OBGYN, but my wife's an OBGYN, so that makes up for that. So I was interested in orthopedics and general surgery and medicine. I like family practice, like all that stuff. But I think one of the main reasons for internal medicine is like there's like a bazillion fellowships that you can do to specialize in all sorts of different things. And I thought I wanted to keep it far more open-ended, if you will. And at that time, I actually was thinking about doing cardiology throughout residency. But I decided to go another route just because I think I have to really respect the fact that as we get more experiences, that it's okay to change your mind. And it took me a while to come to that conclusion, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme throughout your subsequent development as I digest it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I might have heard you say somewhere on somebody else's podcast that it was actually in your residency that you began to recognize the symptoms of burnout. Have I got that right or not?
Yeah, you're right. That's probably with Dr. Lacey on the Scope of Practice podcast, where we talk about a burnout quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing, I never understood burnout. I heard about it throughout earlier in medical school and stuff like that, and people really burnt out in medical school. And for me, I'm like, hey, why don't you just work hard and do your thing, And I think residency taught me that there's always a story behind burnout that's outside of the current situation, that stems from lifelong experiences going back further into childhood for a lot of people. And the more I learned about people in general and what makes them tick, I respected that a whole lot more. For me, burnout was not an option because, coming from China, like I had to do everything I do to assimilate to American culture. I had to make sure that my English was on par so I don't get made fun of, right? So I had a lot of these like must-dos when I was younger. And I carried that sort of same mentality into my medical training. Whereas my sister, who's born 13 years later than me, born in the U.S., she doesn't really have that mentality. We're actually very different people when it comes to this idea of burnout, because she does get burnt out. And then I see other people going through the same things, and I realize that the definition of burnout is individualized for everyone. And it wasn't until residency that I realized that, hey, I was actually burnt out, but I just didn't realize it as a burnout phenomenon. I just realized it as, oh, well, shrug my shoulders and keep going.
I'm really glad to hear you say that. There's a lot of talk about burnout, obviously. And yet I don't find that anybody has been able to come up with a repeatable description of the phenomenon. We even hear it called other things like moral injury and things of that nature. But it sounds like your impression of it is that it's a very personal thing and tends to be different and probably arises from different pressures with each individual. And you think it actually starts before they even get into medicine. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So, I studied mind-body medicine early on in residency. And was exposed to a lot of the intricate. I'm Buddhist, by the way. So in Buddhism, there's a lot of there's a lot of energy that you can generate,
right?
And the energies that you can generate vary from day to day. But then you have to respect the fact that whatever energy you're generating, you're the one that's generating it, right? And so I think that there's an energetic really behind the burnout phenomenon. But I see burnout as a gift. I see it as a gift because without this concept of burnout, we're not stimulated to do the things that we truly want for ourselves and actually pay attention to what we really want. I think that a lot of people who kind of coast along and don't really get burnt out, and then all of a sudden they come to a point where they're like, well, is this where we really want to go? Am I just running down life in this lane towards maybe the wrong direction? So I do think like elements of stress and burnout is actually necessary for us to re-question where we are and how do we want to proceed from here? And are we really going down the right track? So I do feel thankful for the burnout phenomenon and knowing that it's a negative feeling at first, but there's always something positive that comes out on the other end.
That's a very insightful examination of a very complicated topic. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. It puts me in mind, obviously I'm quite a few years your senior, but yes. Back in the 60s, there was a very popular song made popular by a really old-timey singer named Rosemary Clooney called Is That All There Is? And the idea is, you put yourself into something that you see as your Shangri-La, and when you get there, it's, well, gee, what do I do now? Do you think that that's part of how the process works?
I think that it is. I think that a lot of us make ourselves feel so guilty for questioning our current track because, perhaps by questioning where we are, we're insulting our families, we're insulting our friends who have supported us. This is, I think it's called an investment bias, where you're biased that whatever you're doing should be what you're doing because you put so much investment into it, right?
Right.
And that investment is something that if you perceive that you can't get it back, that's actually what burnout is the perception that the time that's allotted for you to develop where you are right now, you can't get back, and therefore you must continue. And I think that's the root of burnout for most people. But in reality, the treatment for success, if you will, this is the name of the podcast, but the actual treatment for success for the burnout is to take a step back and say, it is okay to question where we are right now. We want to take investment bias out of our current situation and see, does this serve me? If it doesn't, then recognize and applaud your family, your friends for the fact that, hey, it served me at this one time. And because it served me at this one time, we're able to look at where we are right now and pivot. And I think through medical training, a lot of people have this such a huge investment bias because of college and medical school and residency. And then they invested their time and hundreds of thousands of dollars into the actual training. So there's a perceived loss when something needs to pivot for them to feel happy. And I think that's what burnout truly is. You know?
That is so insightful. And the interesting thing, I think, for you is what follows from that, because you actually continued to sort of stay on the path that is in that map. You did your residency in internal medicine, actually did some time in private practice, and realized that this was not where you wanted to be, right? And then we got the Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine.
You know, what's interesting about the journey is I always appreciate every leg of the journey. And I'm in a hurry to know what doesn't work in order to know what does work. And that's my philosophy behind life. And I think I got that from my dad. Just try it. And if you fail, congratulations, because success would have been the worst thing that happened to you. And that keeps me pretty positive for the most part. And so, you know, through internal medicine, by the way, I actually was supposed to do a heart failure fellowship at University of Texas, Houston here. I decided not to right after I mashed into that.
I didn't know that part of the story.
To be honest, I forgot it until just now. Yeah. I totally forgot until just now.
Surely that felt like a huge decision for you at the time.
It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders, to be honest, because it was one of the times where I realized that, hey, I'm going to advocate for myself and do those things. And you know, I just finished a 5-minute meditation. I was a chief resident in New York Hospital in Queens, and I was in the chief resident room, and my co-chief David came in, and he's this bright, vivacious guy, a beautiful, wonderful human in general. His name is David Tenenbaum. He's a gastroenterologist in New York right now. And then every time he comes into the room, he gives me the same greeting, which is, "What's up, bro? What are you doing?" And so within 5 minutes, we're able to he was able to pick up that my energy wasn't so great because I had just matched, and he was congratulating me. I just like, "No, don't congratulate me." He's like, "Why?" He's like, if you're not happy with it, then why don't you do something about it? I was like, okay. And then so I submitted my email. So I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So
wow.
Yeah. And so, and you know, we have the opportunity to do that because, you know, as physicians, and we're very lucky to have a very robust job market, right? Where we can find other things to do. So I ended up going with this wonderful practice here just west of Houston. And those group of doctors are like some of the greatest human beings I've ever met. And I still respect them greatly till this day. But, you know, I always felt like I didn't quite belong and something was just not satisfied. And I think they had a sense of that as well, which is that in that facility, I was not able to do what I wanted to do in terms of what my grandpa did for Chinese medicine, is sort of marry my integrative health world of lifestyle medicine. And by the way, my mom's an acupuncturist and herbal specialist. I really want to incorporate that part into it. But I realized that because, by the way, I was a partner in the practice. So as a partner, I started learning the business of medicine, about revenue cycle, about marketing, about just everything. And I realized that, my gosh, the business of medicine is not necessarily set up for a lot of innovation. It's really set up to do the same things kind of over and over again. And if you don't have partners that agree with you or that want to do similar things, it's really hard to construct a system for yourself that's able to do that because it carries risk. So some of the younger partners like myself wanted to incur more risk, but the older partners were like, hey, we're about to retire, so I don't want to do anything different. But we parted ways, and I started Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine in 2017, and it's been a roller coaster since then, but it's been a fun one.
So again, that was a tremendous amount of insight for a relatively young person, but the Center for Lifestyle Medicine has attracted a pretty good crowd, it looks like. So tell us what makes the Center for Lifestyle Medicine different, and why are all these people clamoring to get in?
Yeah, so I'm always doing things on the side. We call it physician side gigs, if you will. And so in my previous practice, because I wasn't necessarily satisfied, I actually co-wrote a book with one of my friends called The Ultimate Guide for Diabetes Reversal. It did a cookbook. Yeah. And then
I want to hear some more about that, but go ahead where I interrupted you.
That's okay. And so through that, I learned marketing, and then I got slapped by Texas Medical Board because there's this thing called the advertising guideline, which I never even knew about, by the medical board of you can't say or do certain things. And then I'm like, you know what? I'll just start my own marketing firm and hire people from overseas, from the Philippines. I still use them, by the way, and started my own thing and started teaching other doctors about what not to do. So, for example,
I apologize for the interruption, but I want to know some more about this. The Board of Medicine in Texas was in disagreement with what was it that you were doing that upset them?
Yeah, it didn't really upset them. It was just reported. So they weren't really upset about it. It's just that there is a very open-ended clause in the Texas Medical Board, which is something called you can't determine superiority over yourself over another one in the same specialty. So internal medicine, for example, right? And so there's a section in my book and section on the webpage that I had that I talked about how conventionally doctors have tools that they use, which are medications, but I think that something better could be done, which is basically start introducing the lifestyle aspect of it within a clinical practice. The word better got me into trouble. All right. And so once I took that off, it was fine.
But it was the truth. Okay. It was the truth. And let me, the reason I'm just kind of blown away about this is, I've been around a while. I've been around the block a couple of times, as they say. And when I was a medical student, we didn't even know what type 2 diabetes was. In fact, it wasn't called that. It was called non-insulin dependent diabetes. Mm-hmm. And it was rare. And as you are very much aware, as time marched on, it has become absolutely epidemic. Mm-hmm. And for any supervisory board to have the notion that there's not a better way to treat it than what we've been doing is a little strange to me. But that's all the whining I'll do for a moment. Go ahead and tell us some more about the book and how you progressed from there. But I mean, what stuns me is that this was a disease that practically did not exist prior to, I don't know, the late 60s, early 70s. Right, and we know that it's a lifestyle disease. So again, pardon the interruption, but pick up where you left off.
Sure. And I think the other reason that I got into hot water is actually the title of the book. It's Reversing Diabetes, which the medical board doesn't think it's a thing and that it could be misleading.
But it is a thing. And it's not.
Yeah.
It's not misleading.
Well, you
and I know that you can make type 2 diabetes go away.
Absolutely.
If you just adjust your diet and your physical activity and so forth. But again, I keep taking over the conversation. Please go ahead.
No worries. But I made a statement to the board that if someone's BMI was 35 and they do some lifestyle changes and the BMI is 38, then are they a diet-controlled obese person? So anyways, I won that argument, which is great. So I got to keep the name of my book but there's advertising guidelines that are in a lot of state medical boards. And the point is the fact that doctors didn't know about it. Something like this would have made me burnt out. like this could have stopped me in my tracks had I not dug deeper, look at every line of the advertising guidelines, and see what am I claiming that's outside of the normal, which I couldn't find to be anything until we discovered a little further. But having said that, I started learning about marketing, learning about Facebook ads, started doing Facebook Live right when it was available for the general public, not just celebrities. And I started doing a lot of educations and YouTube and stuff like that. And then it really empowered me because people were tagging on. And I wasn't selling anything. I didn't tell people to buy the book. All I did was just saying, hey, before you go to the doctor's office, before the medical assistant take your blood pressure, you might want to do like a 5-minute just deep breathing meditation so they can get you real resting blood pressure and not the blood pressure that you have when you're driving 40 minutes to go to the doctor's office, stuff like that, which, by the way, that video had at least 100,000 views. So that one really propelled me to look deeper into, hey, I can do a lot of good in this world, but I got to be organized about it. And that experience really allowed me to develop what Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine is today. But I had the opportunity to take a lot of my social media followers, which is just a little under 600,000 at this point, to my new practice and say, hey, we're starting this, and then sharing the experience. Like, here's the walls going up, here's our what do you call it, the certificate of occupancy in this building, and we're happy about it, and have people celebrate along that success. And I think people really enjoy stories. And I'm a storyteller. So I think the story of developing that and people were really engaged into it. But I'll tell you what it was started as is not the same as it is today. Today, I think it's a much better rendition. So it was always things to be learned when you start practice.
Can you give us an idea of what changed over the years?
I started with multiple people in the practice. So I was the only doctor when we first started, and we had some nurse practitioners and PAs when we first started it. And the mistake that I made was that I try to make us everything for every patient, and that causes its own issues. And instead of being the patient's guides, we became their heroes, which is not what we want to do. In reality, now we operate as guides so patient can be their own heroes, and that's a much better way to practice medicine, and actually prevents burnout to the greatest extent.
That is so smart. Good for the doctor and good for the patient as well.
Yeah, and you know what? And it's good for the staff. It's good for the front desk. It's good for my office manager. And so, there's a lot of more smiles when we change the paradigm of the fact that we should be empowering people to be their own heroes. But we're really taught not to do that in residency. We're taught to, hey, if you do it my way, great. If you don't, then you can find another doctor, and therefore I won't get sued, right? Yeah. And that never sat well with me. But there's definitely a better way to do it.
So what's different, as I understand it, about the way you're approaching the patient is to really take a look at the entire patient and talk to them not just about what medicine they should take, but about modification of their behavior. Am I right so far?
Actually, no. Let me tell you something. That's probably the biggest misconception about integrative health. All doctors have a respect for lifestyle and disease modification. Doesn't take a lifestyle medicine doctor to do that, right? Uh-huh. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because this is a big passion of mine to really tell people, is that we all look at the patient as a whole for the most part if we're doing our jobs. We're all looking at the patients as a whole. And I respect every doctor for looking at the patients as a whole. The problem is language. Whenever a doctor goes into a room, there's already a predefined agenda that before you go into the room. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think what's wrong with it is that if the patient wants to change the agenda for that visit, they should have the right to do so. I'll give you some really cool examples. So we have, let's say you have this 54-year-old woman that comes into the office, and she complains of chronic fatigue, brain fog, memory issues, hot flashes, and they come into the office, and when I sit down, the last thing you want to tell the patient is, what can I do for you? Okay. Because that immediately puts you into the hero's role and the hero's philosophy. This is linguistics, this is language. So one of the things that I teach my staff to do, and what I do, is I sit down and first I thank them. It's like, you know what, thank you for coming all this way for yourself and for your health. I just want to, first of all, thank you for that. And I want to acknowledge that for you, to look them in the eye and say it.
Wow.
And the second is, how do you think that I can help you with your goals of where you want to get to? And then usually they sit back and it's a puzzled face for
I bet they do.
About 30 seconds. And they're like, no doctor's ever asked me that. I was like, well, I am. And so the quality of your life is dependent on the quality of your questions. And if your quality of your questions is offered in the guidance role, they're going to come back with very different things, because now you just offer yourself as a guide, right? We're not there to be Luke Skywalkers and slay their dragons. We're there to be like the Yodas and say, here, you can build your own lightsaber and slay your own dragons, right? And so I think that that's the philosophy that we really want to have. It's about the language of discussion and afterwards, if they tell you, where do you think your role is, now you know. So I actually talked to a cardiologist friend of mine about this. This is another interesting story. And he used to come in there and he'll do his thing. He's like, oh, you got this mixed dyslipidemia. According to the AHA guidelines, you should be on an aspirin, a statin, et cetera, right? And so he started asking, what are the goals that you want to achieve, and where do you see my role in? 50% of patients had no interest in discussing medicines. They just want to know their risk factors and what they can do from a lifestyle perspective. But he's not a lifestyle doctor. And so what he does is like, great, I can help guide you there, but I'm not the best person to tell you about the lifestyle. Well, this person is. Why don't you come to this person for 3 months and we'll recheck your labs and work on that. And then from that point on, he had so many 5-star reviews just from telling the patients expectations of what he's good and what he's not good in doing, is because it creates certainty, it creates value for the patients. That's a guidance mentality. If we change the way that we talk to patients, even just 2 millimeter shift, it creates this massive impact for the patients. And they're going to go away feeling good. You're going to go away feeling good. And guess what? You, as the cardiologist or as the primary care, are not tied to the patient's outcome, which means that if they have a bad outcome, you become emotionally invested. No, we don't want to do that. You want to be like, you know what? I'm here for you, and I have these tools. But if you're not ready to go down the tools of the path that I have for you, that's okay. Here's somebody else. And I respect you for that. If we have that conversation, that's truly what integrative and lifestyle medicine is. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I have to tell you that I'm having a little bit of a there and back again moment on this. When I was a freshman in medical school, my class had the opportunity to hear case presentations by the famous Dr. Tinsley Harrison. You may be familiar with Harrison's Internal Medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, he was still lecturing at the time, and I remember the very first time we got together and he was talking to us about physical diagnosis. He talked about the fact that he grew up and matured in a world where there wasn't a lot that the doctor could do in terms of medicating, because they didn't have any medications. They had digoxin and maybe a couple of other things. So it seemed to have made it much more important for the people that practiced in his era to listen to the patient. In fact, what he said to us was, it's very important that you listen very carefully, because when you're about 10 to 15 minutes into the interview, if you don't have that patient's diagnosis in your differential, you're probably never going to figure it out, because the answer always comes from the patient. And what you're talking about is exactly what he had in mind. And what unfortunately happened in the meantime, over the last 45 years since I heard him speak, was that we're busy entering check marks into an electronic medical record and
Right.
Coming up with a list of ICD-10 codes that will lead to the appropriate CPT code. And meanwhile, nobody's really hearing the patient. You, on the other hand, seem to have mastered the very act of opening that communication pathway.
Yeah, I wouldn't say mastered, but it was my 2 millimeter shift that created the best raving fans, if you will, of our practice and what we actually do. By the way, the same attitude could be installed for your clinical staff. If you're a physician leader in your clinical staff, you want to have the same line of coaching, same line of being that guide and not the hero for your clinical staff, so they can be empowered to do the same thing that they do. And they start naturally using the same language for the patients as well. And it needs to be reverberated within the organization first, to be honest with you. And that needs to be practiced. And then that way, everyone can speak the same language, have the same core values, advocating for the patients. And it really starts from there.
Well, I'm impressed with your humility. I think you're far more masterful at this than you are willing to admit. But I think you really may be at the very center of something that's going to be perhaps the most important shift in the way we do medicine in the 21st century. And with that in mind, I'm interested to know what you think is going to become of primary care going forward.
That's a decision. Let's look at COVID, for example. I think COVID was good in that it really challenges limiting beliefs about the care of patients. Okay. So if we look at the beginning of the pandemic, there's a lot of words used by the media to put the focus on doctors as heroes. I actually have a big issue with that, because they started engaging medical students into clinical practice and exposing them at a time where med students are not prepared, they're not trained to take care of patients at that particular time. They started calling out, retired doctors back, and licensing became a whole lot easier during that time, which it shouldn't have been that hard in the beginning. So a lot of things changed. CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, all of a sudden digitalized everything, and all of a sudden you're getting credentials and Medicare ID numbers like significantly faster to accommodate for the pandemic, which should have been done 10 years ago at least, right? So I think that the adoption of technology is there. And it's fully engaged right now. I'm actually very happy about it. But the problem is, if you see doctors as heroes trying to convey a message, then those heroes will suffer tragedies. And this is what we see right now, right? A week and a half ago, I got an email that the Federation of State Medical Boards is coming down on doctors and taking away licenses of doctors, okay, who are spreading misinformation, and without them defining what misinformation actually is. Is one of them like diabetes is not reversible? Is that misinformation? So
good point.
So, right. And so I know they're talking about coronavirus. That's what leading up to it, but it's a very general statement. It's a very scary statement as well. There's no defined borders that are there. There's it's really the Wild Wild West, and who's making these rules is very divided. Look at the division of doctors just in terms of what their perceived understanding of coronavirus and vaccines are, and immunology, right? There's a huge division there. And we're at this point where there's a lot of scary things that are happening within the state medical boards and within governmental structures. And doctors are burning out now more than they ever did. I mean, before the coronavirus, it was what, 46%? I think it was published by Mayo Clinic in 2017. Yeah. And then that's 46% is only 4 days or more per week. If you go into 5 or 6 or 7 days, that has a lot higher percentage. So I think that if you look at the burnout rate, it's a lot higher. There's a lot of tragedies that can be suffered because there's heroes can be villains in 2 seconds. I've watched Batman and Superman and all stuff like that. I know that's a thing. Yeah. And it's because if the country has heroes and different heroes represent different things, then you can suffer a lot of these tragedies. So primary care now You have people in the media villainizing that, hey, this primary care doctor shut down during the pandemic because he or she doesn't care about his or her patients because of COVID, right? And not people realize that, hey, this might be an actual business decision because they can't pivot in times of isolation to telemedicine that fast. They may need to just sit back and say, hey, we need to figure out what our revenue model is and redefine that, or they don't have the business skills to do in the first place, so they end up retiring early. That's not talked about a whole lot. So I think what we're going right now with primary care is that there needs to be a whole lot more discussion about why things are done, how insurance actually works, right? For example, and gosh, we see this all the time, and it drives me nuts, that if a patient comes in and they get seen by me or my health coaches, and we submit these, CPT or ICD-10 code or CPT or E&M codes to the insurance, sometimes there's initial denials, and then there's resubmissions, and then there's re-resubmissions to the revenue cycle. And all of a sudden, patients are getting EOB 8 months later. They're like, why are you billing me something that occurred 8 months ago? Right. And so they're like, well, it's not me, it's the insurance, and it becomes even more distrust. So clearinghouses are looking at this very differently since the pandemic started, of claim denials and stuff like that. So I think that process sped up. So if we're able to tell the patients that it is our role as a primary care physician, not just to prescribe medicines to you, not just to tell you to do things in terms of lifestyle and interventions, is it possibly our role to let you know how your insurance works? Is it possibly our role to let you know that if I'm talking to your doctor, that's an okay thing to collaborate because we get reimbursed for it? Is it possible for us to let the patients know that if there's a delay in healthcare, there's holdups within the clearinghouse and medical systems, like that should be communicated? Or is it possible to let us know that, hey, we're ordering these labs to Quest or LabCorp or whoever it is, and you may get an EOB from them, so prepare for it. So all these things that create uncertainty, from the finances to the business of medicine to working with other vendors and other practitioners, I think it's actually the role of the primary care physicians to talk about all this, because this is where medicine, really is truly headed. And I can't tell you how many times I'm in forums and it's patient's responsibility to go to the insurance companies and don't understand this. And I'm like, well, is it really? Because if we were in that position, if you were a patient in that position, whose responsibility is it? Who is it that is your hero? Is it your doctors? Was it the insurance companies, right? So I think that the communication, the transparency, the financial structures, financial liabilities, consent to treat, all that has to be digitalized. That has to be explained. And ideally, you would go into a practice and HIPAA releases and consent to treat, I think they should be on audio or video for the patients who can't read very well, right? Or who don't understand those languages. Because when I look at a HIPAA release, I don't know half the thing that's on there. So I think that the term primary care should be, catching that safety net, not just through referrals and stuff like that, but really understanding what is creating social determinants of health issues with the patients and addressing those things. And I think we're able to do that in the digital age. And I think that's the true definition of integrative health.
Well, I am certainly going to agree that you are definitely onto something that's really, really, really important there. And if I were 38 years old, I think that's where I would want to be focusing my attention. And that is, nobody seems to have a good understanding of how the money flows in healthcare, and I don't think that's an accident.
Oh no,
I think it's that way for a very nefarious reason, and I'm not going to take the conversation into that territory, because I do want to ask you about one other thing before we get into your prescriptions for success.
Yes.
And that is something that I think you are probably very proud of, and I'm excited, hopefully, that I'm going to get to participate in, and that's the Physician Automation Summit. You want to tell us about that story?
Yes, October 17th, which is just a few days away.
Not long. Launching the Physician Practice Automation Summit. So we're basically taking everything that I've already talked about on this, minus my own personal history,
And then actually asking the experts, instead of asking about medical board, well, we have a lawyer that we talk to. Instead of talking about tech, well, we have the tech engineers to talk to. Instead of talking about business, so I interview 4 people with MD MBAs who know exactly what they're talking about when it comes to this. So I've gathered people who are much, much, much more smarter than me in different fields, and talked about how do you automate a private practice? Doesn't matter if it's primary care, integrative health, but how do you automate a private practice? What are some models that's already out there? Mayo Clinic actually has a fantastic model. So does Cleveland Clinic. They're both on there. University of Minnesota, they have a fantastic model. University of Arizona, they have fantastic models that are all here. And, when people think about these systems, like, oh, they got oodles of money to spend on this. I was like, well, they do. But if you look at the money behind it, a private clinic could have started the same thing. If you understand what the actual numbers are, right? And the whole idea behind automation is to encourage doctors to decrease burnout through strategic innovation, meaning that if doctors feel that we can help our patients and help ourselves in a much more powerful way, these are the elements that's required for the doctors to do so. That's really addressed on the Physician Practice Automation Summit. And that's what I'm really proud of. And I'm really happy that you're on there as well. We had a great conversation talking back and forth on the summit as well. Yeah. If you want to know more about the summit, it's newpracticecoding.com. So newpracticecoding.com. We put that URL though because I talk a lot about CPT codes and all this new stuff coming in 2022.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the whole package coming up on October 17. And what I would like to do at this point is move along to what gave the title to our podcast. And that is just step out of the way and give you an opportunity to say what's on your mind. So I'm going to close my mic.
I can't wait.
Dr. Cheng Ruan is going to give us his personal prescriptions for success.
So let me talk about the prescription for success. Right before this podcast, I had one of my friends call me, and I challenged him to think about what he really wants in life. And, he jotted down this, hey, someone told me that I should think about how am I going to make my first $1 million, right? I'm like, okay. Well, seems like a tall order. So how are you going to make your first $10? Doing the things that you're not doing right now. And that's where the blank stare comes in. It is easier to dream up how you're going to make $1 million than dream up how you're going to make your first $10 doing the things that you're passionate for. And there's a reason for this, is because we're taught at this point to think big, and there's nothing wrong with thinking big, right? But if you think big and you think bigger and you try to go for these things that are really relatively large, what happens is that your language becomes emotional. You're using emotional words because that $1 million, where did that number come from? So you have to tie some sort of specific outcome to where you're going. But $10, that's a lot easier to do. And in fact, if you can make $10, going from $10 to $1 million is easier going from 0 to 10, doing the things that you really want to do. So from a business perspective, understanding the mechanisms that allow you to be successful when it comes to financial success or fulfillment success is the same. You start with one simple goal. If you're able to achieve that one simple goal, and then you go a little bigger. So how do I get my first 100? How do I get my first $1,000? Now, if you're not the type of person to put down goals that are money-based, well, you don't have to. And that's the best part. But think about maybe the number of people that you want to reach, that you want to help. Let's say that I want to reach to 10 people today. And you know what? I'll just text them in a group text, say, hey, I appreciate who you are. And that makes me feel good. You can do that too, right? But whatever it is, you got to make sure you have a clear and measurable outcome of where you want to go. I can't tell you how many times I didn't do that and I regretted it later on. A measurable outcome is the first thing to jot down. And you know what? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to have a measurable outcome because you don't know what necessarily you want to measure. So if that doesn't happen, then you go to the next step, which is basically think about your life in terms of categories of improvement. Most people think their life, look at their life and they say, well, this is wrong and that's wrong and this is not right because of X, Y, and Z. So those are categories of what's wrong. Well, technically, you can change whatever is wrong. So if you look at every category as a category of improvement, then you know what you're doing. So let's say you have a category, maybe within your business, that's, hey, I want to have a world-class marketing potential. Or another category is that in a personal life is I want to have the most beautiful relationship with my spouse or my kids. And it could be as something as specific, like I want to know how to make a souffle and not have a deflate in the next month and learn French culinary cuisine and stuff like that. Those are specific things. And those are categories in which that defines who you are. And so most people think about these categories by what's wrong, but please think about it by what are the elements of success what are the elements of improvement that will lead you to success per category, because success is defined by different people. A third point that I want to talk about is make sure you're the one that's defining your success, not someone else. Okay. Now, if you were raised up from parents who really value something, let's say they value money because they may not have had a lot of money, so they value money and all they focus on is money. Make sure that the reason that you're not valuing money is just because they're valuing money. Okay, make sure the reason that you're valuing money is because of you. And let's say that you grew up in the opposite type of scenario where money is not valued because they don't worry about it, but they value other things. Could be material things, could be more emotional things. So you don't have to adopt those values if it doesn't serve you. Could it have served you at one time? Absolutely. But does it serve you now? It doesn't have to. Does it serve you tomorrow? Well, you have to ask yourself tomorrow, does this still serve me? Is it creating destruction? Do old patterns that I have learned from my family, from my parents, from my friends when I was younger, does it still serve me? Because if you can't answer that, you're going to get to a place where you're running down the road enthusiastically in the wrong direction. And that's the last thing that you want to do. A fourth point is similar to my first point in tracking measurable outcomes. The fourth point is try to do a 1 to 2 millimeter shift in your mentality, in something, in your actions. Whatever that 2 millimeter shift is, you have to identify as something that you've always wanted to do, but maybe you haven't had the guts to do it, but just do a little bit of it and see how that feels, see how that tastes. And the 2 millimeter shift can really propel you to discover other things. Like I said earlier in the podcast, I talk about us at Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine. When I changed the language of how I approach patients, instead of, hey, how can I help you? It's like, hey, what do you think my roles are in helping you guide to your successes and your goals? That 2 millimeter shift of that, inserting that question before we get into the meat of the discussion, allows me to gauge where the patients are and now opens up a much more meaningful conversation. Now that's my 2 millimeter shift, right? You can have your own 2 millimeter shift and see what shift do you want to do. And guess what? If you shift in the direction and you don't like it, then that's cool because it's only 2 millimeters, just take it back, whereas if you do a 2 mile shift, well, you already moved your damn house. If you want to move back, it's a lot more to do. And so 2 millimeters before 2 miles, $10 before $1 million, right? How do you make your first $10, not your first $1 million? That 2 millimeter shift. The fifth point I want to make is that we all exist in this world where we have very similar emotions. And our emotions drive our behaviors. But the way that we drive our behaviors are different. So my fifth point I want to make is that personalities are different. There's no such thing as a good personality, a bad personality. There's only the way that we perceive it. So when working with other people, working with your colleagues and peers, what you want to do is appreciate how different people are and also try to understand how they are. So the actual prescription for success has to do with the relationships. And the reason is why. I used to do hospice medicine, and whenever I talk to people towards the end of life and they know they only have days or weeks to live, and I love talking to these people, no one regrets working too much. No one regrets being connected with people. What they do regret is that, oh my gosh, I should have talked to this person such a long time ago, and I wish I had the opportunity. At the end of life, everyone wants to understand how they could have doubled down on relationships. It's always relationships, not about the money. It's not about what they did. It's not about working too little. It's about the relationships. And because of that, you want to build towards that success, because we're all going to die one day. We're all going to go towards the end of life one day. Building your relationships now is more powerful than anything that you could ever do to make sure that you are going to continue to live a fulfilled life. And relationship doesn't mean tolerating someone else. It means fully understanding why that someone else is really in your life and how you're going to relate to that person, how you're going to make sure that you become an advocate for that person so they can become an advocate for you. That's what's valued at the end of life. So believe it or not, in business, most business consultants that work at the highest level, doesn't matter if it's Tony Robbins, who works with a bunch of businesses, or Tom McCarthy works with a few really top high-end businesses in the Forbes 50. All the business consultants start with, what is the culture? What is the culture of your business? And the culture of your business is dependent on the relationships that are within the actual business. And so if your culture is not one where there's a lot of respect for each other, the business generally does not do well, and the business does not thrive, and their fulfillment is lost. And so from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint, what we want to do is to make sure that all our relationships around us, and we are compassionate to the people around us. And those are my prescriptions for success. And I want to thank you for allowing me to have this voice, Randy, and to express it.
A lot of wisdom there, Dr. Cheng Ruan. I have enjoyed every minute of it, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to make sure that you tell all of our listeners where they can find you, where they can find out more about the Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine, more about the summit, email addresses, Twitter handles, anything that you'd like to share. Now is the time. So please go ahead.
Absolutely. So if you're a medical professional doctor looking at this, I'm more likely to respond to you on LinkedIn than anywhere else. So it's my name. It's Cheng Ruan, CHENGRUAN. Find me on LinkedIn. My practice, Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine, is texascenterforlifestylemedicine.org, or for short is TXLifemed, LIFEMED.org. Go ahead and check that out. And then the online summit, just make sure you go to newpracticecoding.com. Once again, it's newpracticecoding.com. And that will redirect you to the latest of what we're doing on the online summit. Even after the summit's over, that page is going to be repurposed into the materials that we already covered, if you want to know more about that as well.
Dr. Cheng Ruan, once again, thanks so much for being here. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you at the summit.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. And remember, you can get much more information about our guests, as well as hear them face my rapid-fire questions, at our Patreon site. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, and hopefully offer suggestions on what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks so very much to Ryan Jones, who composed and performs our theme music for us. That's all we have time for today, so be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.